How you doing, everybody? Welcome back to Before I Forget. This is my video channel inspired by my Instagram channel, 1985 Road Dog. Thanks for tuning in. In this video, I'm going to talk about who I think is the greatest American rock band. I'm starting in the 60s up to the present. I've had this discussion with people before. It always comes down to a couple bands, and I look at the influence of the band culturally, socially, what the band's songs meant to the country, lyrical content, how many people they touched around the world, how the songs are part of the American fabric, and really meant something to this day. After much discussion and thought about it, to me, the greatest American rock band is Leonard Skinner. To me, hands down. I've had this discussion with people, and it always comes down to either Skinner or Aerosmith. Now, Aerosmith, I was a huge Aerosmith fan. Pre-rehab Aerosmith, the first, 6 albums, whatever. Again, Aerosmith was able to fall apart, pull himself back together, and have a new life, starting in the, mid-'80s. Dude Looks Like a Lady and all that, and they, had a huge career, Aerosmith. I mean, they were bigger than ever. But you can't count those songs from Dude Looks Like a Lady to the present. Yes, they're good songs. They're well written. There's about 10 different writers on most of those songs. They wrote with a lot of people. Desmond Child, Diane Warren, all these people that they wrote with. And listen, God bless. They had a great career. They came back in the 80s. They had big songs, big hits, but it really wasn't Aerosmith. It was like, I don't know. It was a sober version of Aerosmith, and they, they had no choice. They were broke. Perry and Tyler were junkies. The whole band was junkies. So they had no choice but to listen to the record company, go to rehab, clean up, write with other people. I know Joe Perry from reading books. Joe Perry wasn't happy about a lot of the stuff they had to do, but he did it because it was either that or die. So they came back, Aerosmith. Leonard Skinner, on the other hand, if you know the history of Skinner, I think the first album was 73. And in 77, they had the plane crash and they were done. But those songs they left behind, culturally, socially, touched American people a lot more than any Aerosmith song prior to 84. I mean, Sweet Emotion, Walk This Way, okay. They're great songs. Don't get me wrong. I love old Aerosmith. But they didn't touch people like Freebird, Sweet Home Alabama, Simple Man, Tuesday's Gone. Then you look at the last album, Street Survivors, What's Your Name, That Smell. That band I saw, that was my very first concert, was Leonard Skinner, 1974 Second Helping Tour in Columbus, Georgia. I was young. I barely knew who Skinner was. An older person took me, and I knew the song Sweet Home Alabama that had been big, just come out, and it was on the radio. So that's why I went to the show, because of Sweet Home Alabama. But if you follow the career of Leonard Skinner, they were probably the tightest band ever. They were tight. They were always on the mark, always on the money, never sounded like shit, ever. They had a lot of pressure. Ronnie Van Zant was the singer. He was the leader of the band. He was the older guy, and he would those guys would fist fight and get in fist fights and stuff if something went wrong. I mean, it was a volatile band. They were rednecks from Jacksonville, Florida. But they had a drive and a determination. They came from the street. They came from nothing. They were poor people, and they worked and practiced and practiced and practiced. They didn't change much when they played live. They played the song the same way every night, and it was on the money. Whereas Aerosmith, I saw Aerosmith a lot in those days, 70s and 80s. They always sounded like shit, Aerosmith. I mean, it was just too loud and sloppy, and it was just, they were all fucked up on stage. It was just, Aerosmith never sounded good live. They sounded much better later on, you know, in the 90s and 2000s when they were clean and sober and they had their shit together. They started sounding better live. But in their peak years of the 80s, the 70s into the early 80s, Aerosmith sounded awful. I've seen Aerosmith be like, I couldn't believe how bad they sounded. What was cool about Aerosmith was they were a druggy band. They were a party band. They were cool looking. I mean, Tyler and Perry, man, those guys, nobody looked cooler than those two guys on stage. And everybody knew that they did drugs and partied. And it was like, that was the attraction there. It was a hard, loud rock based around, you know, a drug lifestyle. Leonard Skinner, yeah, I'm sure they did drugs. They were big drinkers. But when they were on stage, it was all business. And they sounded amazing. There's a famous story where Skinner opened for the Stones, Rolling Stones, in 1976 in Nebworth, in England, the Nebworth Festival. They opened for the Stones, and, you know, legend has it, and books have been written, and people talk about how they blew the Stones off the stage. In 76, the Stones were, you know, really, I mean, Keith was a mess. They weren't a tight band, and, you know, they were just playing the rock star role, you know, and Leonard Skinner came on stage and blew them away. You know, Cheap Trick, I always thought Cheap Trick was a great American band. They still sound good to this day. They still play because they need the money, I'm sure. But, you know, Cheap Trick songs were great, but they didn't touch America. They didn't touch the heart and soul of the American public, like Freebird, Sweet Home Alabama, Simple Man, Tuesday's Gone, all those songs I mentioned. I think Skinner's the greatest American rock band that influenced not only American people, but the globe. Those songs were globally huge. To this day, the lyrics, very simple lyrics, clever and simple. Ronnie Van Zant wrote all the lyrics, and he wrote in a simple way so he could connect with people more directly. He didn't use big words. He used simple lyrics and simple words, but it's the way he put them together that touched people. He wanted to have no curtain in front. He wanted to be a direct line to people, his lyrics and how he spoke to people. So it was simple, but it was effective. Freebird. I mean, I've heard that song, I don't know, a zillion times. Like, you know, how many times have you heard Freebird? But man, it's just one of the greatest American rock songs ever. And I've taken into account all the 60s bands like The Doors. The Doors weren't a great band. The Doors had some good songs and a couple good records, and it was all about Jim Morrison and his persona. I mean, I've thought about all the other bands. I mean, I've gone through lists of American rock bands. You know, the other thing about Skinner was they were very blues influenced, hard rock and blues. They loved Clapton. They loved Cream. They loved all that stuff. But their stories and their lyrics were very country. You know, country music in those days, the songs were telling stories. Every country song in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, they were telling stories. So Skinner and Ronnie Van Zant especially listened to a lot of country music. Merle Haggard, and guys like that. And the Skinner songs were telling stories. It was very country in that approach, mixed with this hard rock blues sound and a little honky tonk in there. You know, country in the musicianship. You know, great piano player, Billy Powell, classically trained piano player. So Skinner touched American hearts more than any other rock band. And I'm not discounting bands that were, like I said, Aerosmith in the same time frame. Skinner would blow them off the stage. Yes, Skinner died. The band had the plane crash, and that was the end of Leonard Skinner. Yes, they continued on, and one by one, all the old members passed away, and Leonard Skinner is still out there today. And there's nobody original in that band. people will say, well, Ricky Medlock's original. Well, Ricky Medlock was in Skinner in the very early days for a minute, and then he left and formed Blackfoot. You know, I'm not discounting Ricky Medlock at all, but it's not really Leonard Skinner anymore. You know, to me, it was never Leonard Skinner without Ronnie Van Zant. Yeah, man, Leonard Skinner, to me, the greatest American rock band. People will debate me on this forever, and they'll bring up other bands and other reasons, but I saw Skinner in '74, and I've followed Skinner's career all the way up through the plane crash, and I don't think there's any band in America that had songs with that kind of impact on people to this day. And Skinner's influenced country people by the dozens, modern country people. Skinner, you know, look at, I don't know, whoever. Hank Williams Jr. was a big Skinner fan, and it goes on today. Any of these guys today, whoever's out there, I don't know, all these new country guys, they all will say, oh, I love Leonard Skinner. Skinner touched American people more than any other band. That's my take on it. You know, everyone has their own favorites, but after analyzing it and really looking at what's out there, song-wise, I'm not talking about fame. I'm not talking about album sales. I'm not talking about, you know, how big they were on a concert level. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about the effect of the band's music on American people. Skinner is it. I'll argue that till I'm gone. Anyway, thanks for listening to this take on the greatest American rock band. Check out my book, Tales from the Gutter and Other Rock and Roll Shenanigans. It's on Amazon, hardcover, softcover, Kindle, globally. And check out my Instagram, 1985 Road Dog. Thanks for tuning in. I hope to speak to you all soon. Have a good one. Ciao.